we can start with the lecture. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the buzzword disruption that you hear in economics in the last couple of years a lot of times. And well, when we see each other over the next 4 to 5 years, every couple of months, you will learn that I almost always start with a definition. Before you try to gain some information, you have to be on the same level field so that everybody's talking about the same things. So, what is disruption? What is the definition of disruption? Well, I found 3 sentences. First, disruption is the interruption to a regular flow or sequence of something. No, you have a flow of events, and then suddenly you have something who breaks that. Or you have a continuing act of disorder. Something changes, but doesn't change at a point in time, but over a certain period of time. Or you have a breaking or bursting apart. Nothing is like it was before. But the way disruption was used in the language was never in an economic or in a creative context. It was always used as a natural phenomenon. You have a volcano, you have an earthquake, you have a natural disaster. The transformation of that term to economics or to the creative world is actually pretty new. Well, pretty new. I think it's 27 years. It was introduced in 1992 by TBWA, which is, I think, the second biggest PR company on the planet. At that time, the CEO, Jean-Marie Drew, took that term and put it into a creative economic background. And he said it's the radical change in a marketplace by overturning existing conventions. If you look at the process of disruption, it always goes in kind of the same flow. The problem with the disruption is you only know afterwards if it was a disruption or if you're right in the middle of it. So you have a first phase, it's detectable. You know, you see first points that something is changing. Do you actually hear me without the microphone? Yes. So I can move a little bit. The second phase is it's clear something really is changing. Like in the beginning, you think, okay, there might be something into it. The second phase is clear something is changing. If you're in phase 3, the transformation is inevitable. You already see that the world is at a different spot where it was in phase 1, right? And by the time you're in phase 4, the disruption that you had before is already the new normal, and almost nobody thinks of that anymore. This is kind of the flow that you see with disruption over the course of the history. In the beginning, it's neglectable, and at the end, it's decisive. And if it's disruptive or not is always in the middle of those steps, if you want. So what I want to do first is take you through. Is the microphone better? Yeah. Microphone is better. Okay. What I want to do is take you through some disruptions throughout history, some that really changed economies, if you want, and also changed societies. There are numerous disruptions, so please don't ask me why I forgot X or Y, because it's always a personal interpretation. And of course there have been other disruptions, but those are, from my point of view, one of the big ones that really changed the game field. So we start really early, 120,000 years before Christ was born. I believe we had the first disruption, which was, if it works, religion. If you are 120,000 years ago, everybody was doing kind of their own things. And religion, no matter which part of religion you have, was the first time that a larger group of people had established certain rules on how they want their society to work and everything that they did. And no matter what, don't steal, work together. So even if you have a large distance between groups running around Europe or North America, you had suddenly a certain set of values. That was the initiative that larger groups of people could actually work together. There were no states, there were no laws, so religion was the first time that people could actually cooperate together. Next one. Around 110,000 years later, we lived in tents, and then we started to build houses. Sedentism. People settled down. You were not running around hunting anymore, you were doing agriculture. You realized that staying at home and growing crops brings you further than hunting. You could share with your village, with other people, the things that you grew. And it changed, if you want to use the word, the whole way the human economy worked at that time. It actually changed whole humanity at that point. Now the pace is getting higher, 1,400 years after Christ. Money. The first time money was introduced, it was just for religious purposes. When it was used in merchandise and in buying things, it was 1,400 years, plus minus 100 years. It was the first time that you could actually exchange all kinds of goods, because you had a middle ground, a mean. Before that, if you had bread and you wanted a sword, you needed the blacksmith to knead the bread. If you wanted a sword and you only had the bread, the blacksmith would say, no, I don't need your bread. You would have to exchange goods. And that was the middle ground that you could exchange all goods. If you look at the world GDP, it's not easy to measure that, but if you look at the implication that money had on the trade that was going on the planet, it was massive. It changed everything at that time. Next one, 1786. Any idea? Dr. Edmund Cartwright invented the weaving loom, the first ability to mass produce textiles. And it was the beginning of the whole Industrial Revolution. It changed not only Great Britain, it changed the whole planet. Because on that success of the weaving loom, the British Empire was built. And up until a certain point, it was the greatest empire on the planet. And the starting point was the weaving loom. Fun fact in between, you probably all know that sign. Made in Germany, you've seen that on a car or on a product. And if I'm not mistaken, if you see that, you think the product is not the worst, right? Made in Germany seems to be, I mean, it's not because I'm from Germany, but there are research about that a brand is trusted if it says made in Germany. Well, it was actually during that time, it started in the end of the 19th century, it was a British invention to mark inferior products, because what the Germans did, they just copied the ideas of the British. Actually, Germany was like, we were the Chinese people in Europe. We just copied the same idea and tried to make it. And to distinguish their product from the inferior German products, because we were just the cheap copiers, they invented the label made in Germany. Sort of talking about disruption, that you have sort of 200 years ago, the label is something totally different than it was before. 18th to 19th century, we don't have a real date for that. So I put the two centuries in there. Industrial Revolution. It was the separation from labor to product on a large scale. Before that, if you were a producer of something, furniture, a bike, anything, you produced the whole product. At the end it was yours and you had to sell it. When we had the Industrial Revolution, we had the separation from the labor to that product. You were only doing a small part of that, which created economies of scale, which created a lot of more products that could be sold with all the problems that came with it, with all the wealth that the owners of the factories could get, electricity, everything else what came behind that. So what you see already, and there are certain indicators, if you look at GDP, if you look at world population, the pace of the disruptions, no matter which disruptions you take in such an overview, the pace of disruption gets higher, right? We have we have religion, the invention of religion, 120,000 years ago, or the first signs of religion. It was not really an invention. 110,000 years later, you have the settlement of people, then you have the money. Now we're in the 1700s. So the pace is getting higher. For me, the next step, 1991, the invention of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, which for everything that seems to come right now, it is kind of a super catalyst of everything that has happened. The interconnection of the mass interconnection of machinery, of the Internet of Things. Of course, there was an internet before that on the academic, on the military side, but the way we use the internet today started in 1991. And I even think maybe that is even more important than the invention of the PC itself. I mean, if you have if you have a smartphone right now and you don't have an internet connection, it's practically useless. That's why I put the internet in there. And well, in 2007, for me, the last historic disruption, if you want, the smartphone. Who has a smartphone?
Everybody.
Everybody, right? And it has only been 12 years, not 120,000 years, not 10,000 years. And it changed, I mean, I don't have to tell you, right? It changed everything. The way we communicate. And if you would ask people 12 years ago, that would 12 years, right? 12, 13 years. If you would have asked people 12 or 13 years ago that in about 10 years' time from that point, you will have at every time the whole knowledge of the planet in your pocket, which is literally the truth, right? You can access information wherever you are, and you can access all information wherever you are. They probably wouldn't have believed you. It's a drastic change on how we do things. Right. So, when we talk about disruption, today, that's why I actually put religion and things like that. If you talk about disruption today, you always have the interpretation of technical disruption. Because of inventions that are made. But there are more events that change the way we do business, the way we do economics. Some of them would be, for example, a military disruption. Because rules are different if you are in war. This is a rocket invented by the Nazis, which was not a good idea, and it was the plan was an evil one at that time, because it was. They tried to build a weapon that could destroy every other enemy. Luckily, they didn't succeed. But at the end, this was the start of everything that followed in space, and all the inventions that were made in space. First man in space, landing on the moon, whatever followed after that. And it was so expensive at that time that there was no economic value. The only thing why this thing was invented was because it was war and one party was desperate to win. And after that, when the German scientists were either in Russia or in the United States, it was the Cold War between those two countries who gave the means to follow the research on that subject. And it was only possible because of the disruption of war. Psychological disruption is another thing. Nothing, from the way we need, our body is still the same like 50 million years ago. Nothing really changed. But we need proteins for our brain to function, right? But the consciousness on how we treat animals, on how healthy we want to live, changed over the course of the last 10 years drastically. I don't actually know how it is here in Kiev, but if you would ask, let's say 10 years ago, somebody in Berlin or in Amsterdam, if he or she would eat vegan, then it was like those exotic one or two people that would, and you would just think they're crazy. And it kind of became a mass phenomenon. A lot of people do that actually. Not really a high percentage, but actually in urban areas more and more eat vegan. And it's a psychological disruption. I mean, it's not normal yet, so if you want to go back to the phases, it's definitely not phase 4. Probably it's not even phase 3, but you kind of see that there's something bigger changing in the way we consume food. Another thing is legal disruption. So as a government, you have the power to disrupt a market by a decision that you make. You probably all know this product. I don't know how many of you know that this product is illegal where I live. In the European Union, the light bulb has been illegal for 4 years. You cannot buy it anywhere. Not in Amsterdam, not in Paris, not in Madrid, not in Berlin. So, we have those energy bulbs and everything and LCD lights. You don't really need it. We still have light. We don't live in the dark. But if you are a company that produced that, I mean, this was the start of artificial light, of electricity, right? So it's definitely a huge disruption if that product is not on the market anymore. I have 2 more examples. This is going to be illegal from next year in Germany, in all Europe. You cannot buy those things anymore because of the plastic. It's not going to change the world, but in a certain market, it's going to change everything. Same is true for the straws. Because I'm not judging whether the legal decision is right, if it makes sense to not have plastic straws anymore, if it will change the world environment, but the European Union decided we don't want that anymore. So it's going to certainly change different markets. So we have we had kind of a historic overview, and then we went through what sort of disruptions we can have. And I would like to go through with you 2 current disruptions that we have. And again, if you ask certain, if you sit together in the government, we work in the parliament on artificial intelligence at the moment. if you ask 20 people, probably you have 20 different opinions on what is going to disrupt our world. Because as I said in the beginning, you cannot predict. But there are certain indicators, more or less big indicators, on those, that those things are going to change our economy big time. So the first thing is the whole subject of mobile, right? We were already there, but it seems like we're right in the middle of a disruption, still, on the way we communicate with smartphones, on how we interact, on the data that we produce. If you just think about how much money, from the technical perspective, how much money you needed to broadcast live 60 minutes of television 10 years ago, and how much effort it takes to broadcast live today. Now with Facebook Live or with Periscope. The decrease of the price of a minute of live television is unbelievable. We have a whole democratization of broadcasting. That is why we have YouTube, Facebook Live, whatever, TikTok, whatever platform you want to use. I'm not saying it's always intelligent, but there is definitely a lot of data produced. In fact, this is kind of funny. If we agree that information is data, right? Every word, every letter is just basically ones and zeros, binaries, everything. And there are calculations that the whole, that's not me, that the amount of data, so the amount of information we produce every 2 days is as big as the whole humanity produced information until the 31st of December of 2015. We have an exponential growth of information. Talking about TikTok, I'm not saying it's always good information, but the amount of information is massive. Another example for me is always that SD cards, when we talk about how we produce mobile information, on how we communicate. When you go back to 2002, you needed to spend around $50 for 64 megabytes, right? And today on Amazon you can buy 512 gigabyte for 20 euros, maybe $30. You can even buy a 1 terabyte card today. It's still more expensive. It's like 400, 500 euros because it's fairly new. But if you buy 2 other cards, it's only 60 euros. So it's the same price that you had to pay like 15 years ago for 64 megabyte. Or to say it differently, that card 15 years ago costs $780,000. And it's a huge difference on how we mobily can store information and how we can use that. Maybe another vivid example. If you film something with a GoPro or with a camera with a certain resolution, you need so and so many amounts of megabyte, about gigabyte. And when you think about how much you see as a person, right? You have 2 eyes. This is the area you can see something and you can hear something. Then, depending on how you calculate it and what kind of resolution, you need about 25,000, 2,500. It depends. Terabyte of data to record everything that you see as a person in 80 years. The founder of Google, it's Russian, right? I don't remember his name. The founder of Tesla was Elon Musk. South Africa, right? Steve Jobs' dad was a refugee from Syria. So it's always good to have new ideas from other parts of the planet. This is why if you're a freshman, I can only encourage you to go abroad, to find new ideas. It always works, both ways. You go somewhere, you get new ideas, you bring them home, or on the other side, people come to your country, you talk to them, you get different ideas, different perspectives. Think outside the box is also, well, it sounds like also a buzzword, everybody knows it, but things can happen in an economic background that you cannot think of before that. So if you're somewhere, try to imagine the unimaginable. And then you have to, use your academic background to research if it's really possible, and then you can maybe find a different approach. But if you only do as you're told, and you only apply the rules that are there, I think it's going to be difficult to succeed in a lot of fields. And well, the last one is be creative. That's always my credo. If you think about the lawyers or the doctors, if you have a certain scheme that can be reproduced artificially, then you will have a hard time. But what is really, really hard to copy is creativity. This is also why Henrik and I are two parts of the same medal. It is, even if you do a business background, it is eminently important if you work in a company, if you do your own business, to be creative in a certain way, because this cannot be copied. Creativity is not that eligible for disruption, I would say. And that was the end of it. Thank you for your attention.